Hi everyone, my name is Nat Dunbar and I'm from TravelbyBit, and today we are interviewing the CEO of FinTech Australia, Danielle Sezo. How are you, Danielle?
I'm well, how are you?
Yeah, really well. So there's obviously a lot going on in terms of the digital currency space, especially here in Australia. So what are your thoughts on Australia's first digital currency airport right here in Brisbane?
I think it's an extremely exciting time to be in the digital currency industry, and I think that for Brisbane this is an extremely gutsy and a very exciting move, and I'm really thrilled to see that this type of innovation can happen here in Australia, where we can show some innovation and thought leadership to the rest of the world. And I think that really this demonstrates just how much talent there is in this community. How supportive the government is here of the work that they're doing, how forward-thinking they are in terms of being able to enable innovation in these new areas. But also I think it's a testament to the fact that the community has really been able to articulate that the work they're actually doing to ensure that digital currency use cases are being deployed in a way that is safe, that is trustable, that can be used safely and securely by consumers. Is actually trusted by the government as well. So if it's good enough for the community and good enough for the governments here, I think that's excellent to show that to the public that this is actually something that's safe to use.
Perfect. And what are your thoughts on fintech and digital currency overall, and why Australians should be embracing that?
Fintech is extremely important to Australia's financial service sector because it's where a lot of the innovation opportunities are coming from. And certainly from the perspective of competition, it's very important for us to allow this whole new generation of innovative new fintech companies to thrive, because they actually provide opportunities for there to be more value created for the end consumer as they actually use technology and other innovations to actually help reduce sections in the value chain. So by doing so, they're actually able to produce services at much lower cost, or in a much more efficient manner for consumers, which ends up in more productivity overall. And so consumers can actually benefit from using these innovative fintech companies. But the other financial services incumbents also get those benefits too. So in a sense, not only is it improving competition from the perspective of more players, it's also improving competition outcomes because the existing players are also forced to innovate, and either by partnering or by innovating themselves, they're also compelled to deliver much more efficient and productive products and services for consumers. So at the end of the day, the consumer benefits. More than that, it's also important for Australia to remain competitive against what's happening in the rest of the world. And fintech is really exploding at pace globally. And I think we're very fortunate in the work that both the community, the government and the regulators have done to come together and to think through a really balanced regulatory regime to support that in such a way that actually not only does it become safe for fintech and digital currency operators to thrive and grow and to deliver services to consumers, it really sends a message to the rest of the world that Australia is actually starting to lead in some of these areas. And in fact, that then creates opportunities to pull in some of the best talent, to grow some of the best businesses, to establish some regional and then international leadership, and really create a very innovative ecosystem around these types of new technologies that we can actually then be building into the industries of tomorrow.
Very interesting point about, a lot of fintech companies wanting to start up here and wanting to grow. In terms of that, what's the state of play when it comes to crowdfunding legislation in Australia at the moment?
Equity crowdfunding is one of the favourite pieces of legislation that FinTech Australia has been working on to develop, because the effects it will actually have in terms of the companies that it will help is ginormous. We have long had in Australia a problem for small to medium enterprises being able to access finance. It was problematic for them to potentially secure loans from banks because it was a segment that was either unprofitable or too risky for them to lend against. If they could lend against it, it was at very, very high interest rates because the risk was so great. And in other cases, many businesses were actually starting to rely on things like credit cards. And credit card is one of the most expensive forms of debt that you can get. So the new equity crowdfunding regime is very exciting because it really opens up the opportunity for retail investors to start actually investing in some of these new business ideas. So not only does it open up a new channel of investment opportunity for investors, it also means that the companies that are actually seeking this funding have a much more diverse source of capital with which they can actually access to grow. So we're improving the sources of available capital in Australia. We're improving, I think, the quality of the businesses that are coming off the back of that because they're less reliant on expensive forms of debt. They're much more connected to their customers because in many of these cases, the retail investors that invest in these companies are often their early users and consumers. So they know the businesses well, they trust them, they want to invest back into the business to show their support. And in doing so, I think the company is able to then build a really strong relationship and connection with the investors that are investing through the new equity crowdfunding regime. So in terms of where that regime is sitting, we have seen the passage and the effective commencement of the public company crowdfunding legislation. We have been making some amendments together with the team in Federal Treasury and some of the regulators and the lawmakers to now extend that legislation for private companies. And we actually saw that bill pass the lower house of Parliament just recently. So in fact, I think, fingers crossed and luck permitting, we should actually hopefully be able to see the passage of the private company regime by the end of March, which would therefore mean, with the bill in its current state, that private companies would then be able to access the equity crowdfunding regime as well 6 months after that.
So what are your thoughts about Brisbane Airport being the first digital currency airport in the world, and what do you think that does for the economy in Brisbane in terms of bringing overseas investment over here?
I think that this experiment, and I hope it turns out to be really successful because I personally am really excited for this one. I think the initiative to roll out cryptocurrency payments through an airport is a really great idea. Because it's the perfect use case where you have a lot of people who are travelling who often don't have cash, or there's a lot of frustrations and existing blockers or barriers for people who are actually trying to bring cash in. It's very expensive, there's all sorts of different gaps and troubles, so it's a really nice use case to help solve some problems that people have. In doing so, just because of the sheer volume of people who are actually coming through airports and the type of mind frame they're in, I think it's a really nice way to actually introduce people who wouldn't normally be thinking about cryptocurrencies or digital currencies as anything but an investment opportunity to really start thinking about actually, hey, in fact, this is actually a currency. I can use this to transact for goods and services. And for many of us in the industry, we've long hoped that things would actually revert back to its original intent of being able to see these things used as a means of actually exchanging value in that sense. So I think that from that perspective, many of us in the industry who've been looking at this for a while are actually very excited to see these sorts of initiatives that really drive greater uptake and use of digital currencies in a way that they were always kind of intended to be. So I think from that perspective, it's really exciting. I think from Brisbane's perspective, it's very exciting because there are a lot of people out there in the world who are holding a lot of digital currency stockpiles. I think it's a good opportunity and a good excuse for them to actually come here and actually see what's happening and to experience what it's like to go into an airport where they could go into almost any shop and transact in one of their different currencies. And to also therefore explore what's actually happening here in the innovation scene firsthand, because, let's face it, that's a really interesting and very novel sort of use of technology, which I think is a really good expression of what Brisbane and Australia is really good at, getting things done and doing them in a way that's really, really positive for the customer, leads to a really positive consumer outcome and a really great customer journey overall.